Today is the first day of the rest of our Marvel Snap life. It is the first season without Spotlight caches, and thus the first season where I don't need to do a Spotlight cache guide, but you still have to plan out your purchases. Let's take a look at all of the cards releasing in this new X-Men season. First up is the Season Pass card, Esme Cuckoo, whose name I am almost certainly mispronouncing. This is a 3/4 that copies a card out of your deck and makes it a 3/4 as well, which means that while she may be a little bit below the generic playable elite stat line of 3/5 shown by cards like Copycat and Red Guardian as a pseudo 3/5, she is close to it, and I think we'll be pushing the definition of what that generic playable stat line is. Esme is a really interesting card, in large part because card draw in Marvel Snap, which this card effectively is not as valuable as it is in other games. In a game like Hearthstone, or Magic the Gathering, or Legends of Runeterra, effectively drawing a card from your deck is good because it allows you to trade your resources for your opponent's resources at a 1-to-1 rate, and then just run them out of resources because your cards are drawing cards. That is not a thing that is available to you in Marvel Snap. In Marvel Snap, you are constrained by the time that we have to play the game, which is why efficient stat lines are so valuable, because effectively invalidating your opponent's resources much of the time is done by simply just playing bigger things than them. This makes her a really interesting card, because if you told me they printed 3/4 draw a card with potentially some upside, I would say in most card games, that's kind of a good thing. But in this card game, you've got to be building for the upside. You've got to be aiming at making sure that what she copies is something that's incredibly valuable. In a deck with Victoria Hand, for example, her competition is going to be Agent Coulson, and typically, unless you're looking for specifically multiple cards, I think she should end up better, in large part because of the fact that the cards that you put in your deck are generally going to be better, given that 3/4 stat line, than whatever it is Coulson is giving you. Now, this is an interesting card in addition in Mr. Negative decks, Mr. Negative being a deck list, a type of deck list that focuses very heavily on gore, on Iron Man. I think you're going to see a lot of gore Iron Man for this card pretty early, and I think that that is going to be a functional, it's going to be a card that raises the floor of those Mr. Negative decks is my baseline expectation, makes it easier for you to limp into games, for you to get through games where you're not actually Mr. Negativing and your opponent can't just think that they're going to bully snap you because you might just be able to drop gore mystique on their face thanks to Esme. That kind of stuff is relevant. The fact that Mr. Negative can limp has been one of the biggest upgrades to it, and I think this card probably lets you limp a little more easily, and that is a good thing. There is also an interaction going on in the game right now where if you copy a Mr. Negative or Pixied card, sometimes the Mr. Negative buff will override Esme's cost setting, so you might get it for free and still keep the 4, which is really interesting, and I don't know how that's going to pan out, but it is worth mentioning. Downsides of this card is that the card Mobius M. Mobius seems like it'd be quite good against the gore Iron Man stuff, which means that when you're mostly playing a card like this, I think what you're going to look at doing is doing her for a little bit of a smaller role. Maybe you have one Iron Man in your deck, one really good hit, and then the rest of your hits are just things you're happy to have a second copy of. You're playing her as 3/4 draw a card that gets your discount off a Quinjet or a buff off of Victoria Hand. Copying a Victoria Hand is obviously a pretty solid thing to do. There's a lot of interesting applications for this, and I'm looking and hoping that this might be a card that can make 3/4 a little bit more relevant thanks to the ability where 3/4 has just been a sort of dead stat line for a while. Perhaps the card that generated the absolute most confusion upon reading it, Surge is much less complex than she appears. Glenn Jones analogized her ability to a spark. Basically, the way it works is when you play Surge, a spark goes to the first card on your top of your deck. When you play that card, it re-triggers Surge. Then the spark goes to the next card on top of your deck. You play that card, it re-triggers Surge. Then the spark goes to the next card on top of your deck. All of that is very straightforward, but it does mean there's a couple of things to keep in mind with this card. One is, in much the same way that a Cosmo on a Fire Hair lane will stop the Fire Hair from repeating on reveals, a Cosmo on a Surge lane will stop the Surge from repeating on reveals. However, a Cosmo on the lane where the card that has the Spark is played should not stop the Surge from repeating her on reveal. The ability is sort of located on her and on this Spark. By the same token, you can't really duplicate the ability in a meaningful way. You can't have two quote-unquote sparks going off at the same time. If you somehow play Surge and Odin on the same turn, Odin the Surge, what'll happen is the top card will get +2, -2, and then when you play it, the next card will get +1, -1. This is not a card that's going to be like super incredibly easy to like loop or anything like that. The Wong stuff, the Odin stuff seems pretty much out, in large part because I think if you follow that thought process, it maybe ends up going exponential in ways you definitely don't want in your game. As far as this card, I think it could be very interesting in bounce lists, enabling them to repeat dangerous on reveals even more easily than they already can. I think that could be super helpful. I think maybe it could go in Darkhawk bounce lists. I think the worry I have for a lot of decks with this card, though, is that it doesn't end up making a ton of sense if you are relying on tech cards in a meaningful way. If you're a Shang-Chi deck, if you're a Juggernaut deck, if you're playing these cards that need to be played or really want you to play them at certain times in order to extract their maximum value from them, you're going to feel very awkward including Surge, which is why I sort of jumped towards Bounce, because it's not a deck that really does that. You're going to be able to avoid having these massive sequencing issues because you just don't run a lot of the cards that give you those sequencing issues. But I am kind of interested to see what happens if you just jam it in whatever deck. I do think in a world where you are trying to jam it in whatever deck, it might be being held back by, for example, the 2/2 stat line. It is going to take a lot for this card to outrate something like a Sam Wilson even, and Sam Wilson is just like pretty good. It's going to take a lot for this card to outrate even like an Iron Patriot. And if you're just playing it in a deck where you have like your Shang-Chi or your Juggernaut or whatever, you can put yourself in awkward situations. However, the baseline ability that this card has is pretty damn strong. If anything holds it back from generic playability, it's the 2/2 stat line, which is hard to justify, and the fact that you have awkward sequencing issues. What we need to find out is whether or not this card is going to be worth it stat line agnostic in those decks that have those sequencing issues, if it's just worth playing for the upside. There are a couple other interactions to talk about, like if you get this thing on a Kitty Pryde, everything will keep the buffs, but it won't repeat the ability, right? So a Kitty Pryde will keep the +1, -1, but replaying the Kitty Pryde constantly does not apply the ability to the top card of your deck again. Again, we talked about the Spark earlier. That's an analogy from Glenn Jones. Not an official name for this mechanic, but it should help people understand what is exactly supposed to happen with this card. On the whole, I'm optimistic for her. I think she could do cool stuff, but I find it hard to figure out if she hits that threshold for generic playability, and if she doesn't, there actually are fewer decks that meet her specific requests than you might think. At 3/4, Prodigy is effectively a much more limited Mystique. It's a card that can copy the ability of the card in front of it when it is in the back row. This means that you're going to need a couple of specific cards in order to best use this card. A, you're going to need good targets for it that you can get value out of during the game. B, you're gonna need the ability to manipulate your board spaces and make sure that this is a card that is going to be hitting the things you actually want to hit. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I think that there is one deck that like very specifically has the ability to do both of those things and wants to do both of those things. And that is an Elsa Bloodstone, Galacta, Sam Wilson, Kitty Pryde deck. These are the kind of cards that Prodigy wants to be played with. We know how strong multiple Galactas can be. Even just baseline playing a Galacta as the first card in a lane can be followed up with 1-drop Prodigy, 1-drop outside of the lane. That's a double Galacta proc on 5. Even doing something like that with Elsa Bloodstone is extremely valuable in a deck that is very much built around doing stuff of that nature. Copying engines is sort of what I envision this card wanting to do. A lot of people look at it and they're like, I'll play it in Mr. Negative. I'll play it in Living Tribunal. I don't think you're really doing either of those things. Mr. Negative doesn't need more endgame power. It already has the most endgame power in the game. What it needs is the ability to win those games where it's not nutting off. This is not exactly a Mr. Negative card to me. And the same applies to Tribunal. When you do your Tribunal combo, you're not losing anyway. I don't care if you have, 10 million points or just 50 in every lane. You're winning every game you play when that happens regardless, unless people interact with you. And this guy's not stopping interaction. So when I see this card, I think of him as a force multiplier for Elsa Bloodstone. I think of him as a force multiplier for Galacta. I think of him as a force multiplier for Gwenpool. And then I think, what cards allow me to mess with board slots easily? Sam Wilson comes to mind. Kitty Pryde comes to mind. Cards that move like Jeff and Rocket and Groot come to mind. And that really all sort of coalesces into like one deck that really strikes me as like, oh yeah, that's a pretty cool thing to do. It's worth mentioning, much like Esme Cuckoo, this is a card that costs 3. Maybe we could figure out a way to put it in Silver Surfer. I'm not incredibly optimistic for that, in large part because I don't really know what I want to be copying with this guy. I'm sure there's something cool, but like what? We're copying Sebastian Shaw, the card we cut last month, so that we could get Captain Carter in, who's just like a better version of that. What are we copying, a Brood? That doesn't really seem like a thing I'm really interested in doing. How often am I going to actually have the ability to make sure this guy is in the back row if I'm not doing that? Again, we're probably going to want to be a Sam Wilson deck if we are, because we really care about the board slot thing. I guess it's just a card that strikes me as much more for multiplying engines than anything else. And Surfer does play Galacta. It could play Gwenpool. I think this card is sort of like a soft version of Images of Icon, is sort of what I'm getting at. Do you remember when Images of Icon was everywhere, and it was just like Galacta Images was the thing you did in your Agamotto deck? This is sort of like that, except you can put it in your deck. And I think that's a really interesting spot to be in, because I think it's obviously weaker than Images, but it costs less, it is a body, it's harder to make work, probably, but there's a pretty high payoff to it. Elixir is a card I don't understand in terms of how I'm supposed to make this card good or playable or anything like that. This is a 2/3 that has an on-reveal that revives one of your cards that got destroyed last turn, which is really awkward because it kind of requires you to destroy something on turn 5. Maybe I'm just not Phoenix Force-brained enough, but I can't put together anything that actually makes a ton of sense with this guy. He seems like a really interesting card, just like, oh, that's a 2/3, it's on raid, I might just be able to do something cool with that, like maybe I get something cool out of what I'm trying to do here, but none of it actually makes a lot of sense, because what you end up having to do is, let's say you're going to be like miserying or whatever. You misery on 4, you bring something back. I don't want to bring back the hood. I don't want that 1/3 body. Part of the point of misery is that I don't have to have that 1/3 body to get that repeated thing. I might as well just be playing Firehair. That seems a little bit better to me. And so you have this card that's like, okay, what are we going to blow up on turn 5? Which is like, basically our full turn 5, right? Like we're blowing something up probably with a Venom that we want to bring back. Are we playing like Galacta? Blow up the Galacta? Bring back the Galacta? That doesn't make any sense. We can't do that because we could blow up the Galacta on 5, but then we bring it back on 6, and that doesn't make the greatest play of all time. I guess I can't figure out what I'm supposed to do with this. I'm sure there's something stupid, but I don't know what it is that I'm supposed to do with this that's stupid that I can't do with Firehair and just sort of have a better upside potential play. The wording of this card is so specific that I honestly wonder if this is a card that like was meant to go with another card that was supposed to release this season that didn't. That card being Kid Omega, which is the activate, destroy something, gain its power. That seems super plausible, right? Because like when you look at the text of this card, if you do Kid Omega, you play Black Panther, you Kid Omega the Black Panther, then you revive the Black Panther. That seems like a really powerful thing to do with this, but we don't have a way of like storing a destroy in the current metagame. We don't have a way of like making sure that we get to blow up our 5-drop in the current metagame. We have to instead spend our turn 5 blowing up a 4-drop. And that's sort of the problem here. I am a bit of a Zorn optimist, and I'll tell you why. The major reason I'm a bit of a Zorn optimist is I think that like semi-move mid-range is pretty close to being good already. We have a bunch of unique cards that are going to be pretty interesting, and frankly, I think this card is better offensively than people think. It's not like a soft goose or whatever. There's a lot of really relevant, cheap stuff, like 3s and 4s in a metagame like this. And I think that having the ability to force your opponents to go somewhere else with their 3s and 4s, it's like a soft Asteroid M. And I think we all know how disruptive an Asteroid M can be when you have to play against it. Furthermore, I think it's a really cool design because I mentioned it being a soft Asteroid M. For those who are unaware, in the comics, Zorn is later revealed to be Magneto in disguise. So very cool that this is a sort of inverted Magneto. There's also like some further things where it turns out there is a real Zorn. They retcon the fact that he was Magneto, and it's a whole thing. But the point is, cute nod by the design team to Magneto. I think this card has just potential as like a fairly okay 2-drop. Now, when I say that, I mean more like a Gorgon style 2-drop than I mean like a Sam Wilson style 2-drop, where it's like, I can see myself wanting this in certain situations, but definitely not all of them. Maybe there's a world where I build my sort of soft, mid-rangey Vulture type deck. I do think that this card really wants, like, the release version of Spider-Man 2099, where he was a 4-cost as opposed to the current 5-cost version. Not being able to have another card that you're meaningfully moving for advantage does kind of suck here, but maybe you could try something with Red Wing. Maybe you could, because like, again, this is a 2-3 into a 3-5 that's pulling something from your hand. It's good on rate. You're just getting nice things to happen. I'm not saying this is the greatest card of all time, but I think people are low on it in a way that I definitely am not. So as far as I know, there should not be a long-term or limited time game mode. Sorry, I hear LTGM and I just like make up an acronym for it. There should not be a limited time game mode for this month. As far as I know, also, the 3 cards that we got when Snap Packs dropped were originally going to come out this month. They are not coming out this month. I don't know what happened, because when we data mined, or not we, when I looked at the data mines, I'm not going to take any credit for that, on SnapFan, there were supposed to be like 3 other cards that looked like really powerful Series 4s this season, including Kid Omega, who looked really scary. If you want to check my most recent video on this topic, I talked about them in that. They do not appear to be releasing this season. They appear to have a release date of June instead. I'm not really sure what's going on with that, but it is notable. And yeah, I don't really get it, but it's definitely happening. All right. So, with all of that in mind, which of these cards am I most excited for? The first 3. I think that Esme and Surge and Prodigy are the interesting cards in this season. Prodigy, I think, is like a card that I'm interested in large part because I like that sort of Elsa Bloodstone Galacta style of gameplay. It's a thing that I enjoy. I like playing Kitty Prydes and Sam Wilsons. That's kind of my style. I'm not sure it ends up sticking, but I do think that like that's a direction that I'm pointing that card that not a lot of other people are pointing it, and I think it probably does make some sense. As far as the last 2 cards, Zorn might be like a pretty solid Gorgon-style role player. I have no idea what to do with Elixir, and we're currently in the midst of experimenting with Surge and Esme, so I want to remind you all, I'll be streaming today. I believe drops are going on, and in addition to that, I have a giveaway of the new packs bundle that I will be doing live on stream. Only, I think, I might be the only person who has one. We'll see how it ends up going. Make sure you stop in and check it out. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.